World War II was a turning point in history, with Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany initially gaining significant ground across Europe. However, a series of critical battles ultimately led to Germany's defeat. This video will explore 4 pivotal battles that played a crucial role in the downfall of Hitler's regime.
Assembled here today, accept the surrender terms which have been made with a delegation from the German army.
The Battle of Dunkirk, which took place from May 26 to June 4, 1940, was a significant event in the early stages of World War II. As Nazi Germany rapidly advanced through the Benelux countries and France, Allied troops found themselves surrounded in the Flanders region, with their only escape route being the northern French port city of Dunkirk. The German forces, consisting of 1,200 tanks and 40,000 additional vehicles, quickly encircled the British, French, Belgian, and Dutch troops. Over 350,000 Allied soldiers were trapped, facing either elimination or capture by the advancing German army. The situation seemed hopeless, with the Germans just 30 kilometers away from Dunkirk and victory within their grasp. However, in a surprising turn of events, Hitler ordered his troops to halt their advance, despite the recommendations of his generals to proceed with the attack on Dunkirk. This decision allowed the British Navy valuable time to organize a defensive perimeter around the city and commence an evacuation plan, which would become known as Operation Dynamo. The British Navy's efforts, along with the assistance of civilian boats and vessels, resulted in the successful evacuation of approximately 340,000 Allied soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk. This incredible feat was achieved despite constant bombardment from German aircraft and artillery. The evacuated troops would later play a crucial role in the liberation of Europe from Nazi occupation. Hitler's reluctance and strategic. Blunder at Dunkirk. Adolf Hitler's decision to halt the German advance on Dunkirk remains a topic of debate among historians. This strategic blunder allowed the Allied forces to evacuate a substantial number of troops, which would later prove crucial in the fight against Nazi Germany. One theory suggests that Hitler, who had long admired the British Empire, believed that by sparing the trapped Allied forces, he could foster a future alliance with the United Kingdom. Hitler allegedly hoped that Germany and Britain could unite against their common enemy, the Soviet Union, and establish dominance over Europe. However, as it became clear that the British government saw Germany as an adversary, Hitler's stance changed, leading to direct confrontation between the two nations.
Roosevelt verlangt endlich die Bereitwilligkeit, dass die deutschen Streitkräfte das Staatsgebiet folgender unabhängiger Nationen nicht angreifen: Großbritannien, Irland, Russland, Bulgarien,
Another perspective argues that Hitler believed his soldiers were exhausted and required a brief respite before engaging in further battles. However, this reasoning contradicts the assessments of his generals, who reported that the German troops were highly motivated and in excellent condition to continue their advance on Dunkirk. Regardless of Hitler's motives, his decision to halt the Wehrmacht's progress at Dunkirk had far-reaching consequences. The successful evacuation of approximately 340,000 Allied soldiers dealt a significant blow to Germany's plans for a swift victory. Many of these rescued troops would later be redeployed in the fight to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation, ultimately contributing to Germany's defeat. Moreover, the events at Dunkirk served as a powerful symbol of British resilience and unity in the face of adversity. The Dunkirk spirit, which came to represent the nation's resolve and determination, bolstered morale and strengthened the British people's commitment to the war effort. The Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway, fought from June 7, 1942, was a pivotal naval engagement in the Pacific theater of World War II. Although Germany was not directly involved in this battle, its outcome had significant implications for the European conflict and the eventual defeat of the Third Reich. Following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, which brought the United States into the war as an Allied power, the Japanese Empire sought to establish dominance in the Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, devised a plan to lure the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle near the Midway Atoll, a strategically important location in the Central Pacific. Yamamoto's plan involved attacking Midway to draw out the American aircraft carriers, which had been absent during the Pearl Harbor attack and posed a significant threat to Japanese naval operations. By eliminating the U.S. carrier fleet, Japan aimed to cripple American naval power in the Pacific and prevent interference with its planned invasion of New Guinea and other territories. On June 4, 1942, the Japanese fleet, consisting of 4 aircraft carriers, 319 aircraft, 26 cruisers, 55 destroyers, 20 submarines, and 39 transports, converged on Midway. Unbeknownst to Yamamoto, American cryptographers had broken the Japanese naval code, allowing the U.S. Navy to anticipate the attack and prepare an ambush. As the battle commenced, the Japanese launched a series of airstrikes against Midway, but the island's defenses proved more resilient than expected. In a surprise counterattack, American aircraft from the carriers USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown targeted the Japanese fleet, catching them off guard. In a matter of minutes, American dive bombers inflicted devastating damage on 3 of the 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, managed to launch a retaliatory strike, damaging the Yorktown, but was subsequently sunk by American aircraft later that day. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point in the Pacific War, as it dealt a crippling blow to the Japanese Navy and thwarted their plans for further expansion. The loss of 4 aircraft carriers and hundreds of skilled pilots significantly weakened Japan's ability to project power and allowed the United States to seize the strategic initiative in the Pacific. The significance of Midway for Germany. While the Battle of Midway was fought between the United States and Japan in the Pacific theater, its outcome had far-reaching consequences for Germany and the course of World War II in Europe. The Japanese defeat at Midway significantly impacted Germany's strategic position and ultimately contributed to the Third Reich's downfall. Prior to Midway, Japan had been a formidable ally for Germany, diverting Allied resources and attention to the Pacific. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had forced the United States to focus on the Pacific War, temporarily relieving pressure on Germany and Europe. Hitler had hoped that Japan's success would keep the Americans occupied, allowing Germany to concentrate on its campaign against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. However, the Japanese defeat at Midway dealt a severe blow to this strategy. The loss of 4 aircraft carriers and numerous skilled pilots significantly weakened Japan's ability to wage war in the Pacific. This setback not only hampered Japan's offensive capabilities, but also limited its capacity to support Germany by engaging the Soviet Union in the Far East. With Japan's reduced threat, the Soviet Union could now allocate more resources and troops to defend against the German invasion. The Red Army, no longer facing a significant threat from the east, could concentrate its efforts on resisting the Wehrmacht's advance. This shift in the balance of power on the Eastern Front would prove crucial in the coming years, as the Soviet Union played a vital role in grinding down German forces and ultimately pushing them back towards Berlin. Moreover, the American victory at Midway allowed the United States to gradually shift its focus towards the European theater. With the Japanese Navy's offensive capabilities diminished, the U.S. could allocate more resources, including troops, equipment, and supplies, to support the Allied war effort against Germany. The increased American presence in Europe, coupled with the growing strength of the Soviet Union, put immense pressure on the German war machine. The Battle of Midway also had significant psychological implications for Germany. The Japanese defeat demonstrated that the Axis powers were not invincible, and that the Allies had the capability to inflict decisive blows against them. This realization undoubtedly affected German morale and strategic thinking, as the prospect of a prolonged multi-front war against increasingly powerful adversaries became more apparent. The Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, which lasted from August 23, 1942 to February 2, 1943, is often considered the turning point of World War II in Europe. This brutal and devastating battle between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions of conquering the Soviet Union and ultimately led to Germany's defeat. After the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, despite initial successes, the Wehrmacht found itself engaged in a prolonged and costly campaign. In the summer of 1942, Hitler launched a new offensive aimed at capturing the strategically important city of Stalingrad, located on the banks of the Volga River. The city held significant symbolic value, bearing the name of the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, and its capture would have served as a major propaganda victory for Germany. The German offensive, led by the Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus, made initial gains and managed to penetrate the city. However, the Soviet defenders, under the command of Generals Vasily Chuikov and Georgy Zhukov, put up a fierce resistance. The battle soon degenerated into brutal house-to-house fighting, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. As the battle progressed, the German forces found themselves increasingly bogged down in the rubble-strewn streets of Stalingrad. The Soviet defenders employed guerrilla tactics, utilizing the city's ruins to their advantage and constantly harassing the German supply lines. The fighting was intense and unrelenting, with snipers, booby traps, and close-quarters combat becoming the norm. Despite the mounting losses and deteriorating conditions, Hitler remained committed to capturing Stalingrad at all costs. He believed that the city's fall would deal a decisive blow to Soviet morale and bring the Soviet Union to its knees. However, this obsession would prove to be a fatal mistake. In November 1942, the Soviet forces launched a massive counter-offensive, Operation Uranus, which targeted the weak Romanian and Hungarian forces guarding the German flanks. The surprise attack proved successful, and the Red Army managed to encircle the entire Sixth Army, trapping nearly 300,000 German soldiers inside Stalingrad. Hitler, despite the advice of his generals, refused to allow the trapped forces to break out or surrender. Instead, he insisted on supplying them by air, a task that proved impossible given the harsh winter conditions and the growing Soviet air superiority. As a result, the German forces in Stalingrad suffered from severe shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The battle reached its climax in January 1943, with the Soviet forces tightening their grip on the city. On January 31st, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered the remnants of the Sixth Army, marking the first time a German field marshal had ever surrendered. The defeat at Stalingrad was a devastating blow to Germany, not only in terms of military losses, but also in terms of morale and prestige. Factors contributing to Germany's defeat at Stalingrad. The German defeat at Stalingrad was a result of several interconnected factors that ultimately led to the collapse of the Sixth Army and marked a turning point in World War II. These factors included strategic miscalculations, logistical challenges, underestimation of Soviet capabilities, and the harsh Russian winter. One of the primary reasons for Germany's failure at Stalingrad was Hitler's strategic blunders. Instead of focusing on the capture of the Caucasus oil fields, which were crucial for fueling the German war machine, Hitler became obsessed with the symbolic value of capturing Stalingrad. This fixation led to the overextension of German forces and a failure to prioritize strategic objectives. Moreover, Hitler's insistence on holding Stalingrad at all costs, even when the Sixth Army was encircled and facing annihilation, proved disastrous. His refusal to allow a breakout or a timely withdrawal led to the needless sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. Logistical challenges also played a significant role in Germany's defeat. As the battle progressed, the German supply lines became increasingly strained, with the Soviet forces constantly disrupting and harassing them. The vast distances, coupled with the deteriorating infrastructure and the harsh winter conditions, made it difficult for the Germans to maintain a steady flow of supplies to their troops in Stalingrad. The German High Command also underestimated the resilience and capabilities of the Soviet Red Army. The initial successes of Operation Barbarossa had led to a belief in German invincibility and a dismissive attitude towards Soviet military prowess. However, the Battle of Stalingrad showcased the Red Army's ability to adapt, fight tenaciously, and mount effective counteroffensives. The Soviet leadership, particularly Generals Zhukov and Chuikov, proved to be skilled strategists who effectively utilized their resources and exploited German weaknesses. The Soviet tactic of hugging the enemy, which involved close-quarters combat and negated German advantages in armor and air support, proved highly effective in the urban landscape of Stalingrad. The harsh Russian winter also had a significant impact on the battle's outcome. The German forces were ill-prepared for the extreme cold, lacking proper winter clothing and equipment. The freezing temperatures, which dipped as low as -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit, caused widespread frostbite, hypothermia, and mechanical failures among German troops and vehicles. In contrast, the Soviet forces were better accustomed to the winter conditions and were able to use them to their advantage. They launched their counteroffensive Operation Uranus in November 1942, capitalizing on the weakened state of the German forces and their Romanian and Hungarian allies, who were less equipped to handle the cold. Lastly, the sheer scale and intensity of the battle, coupled with the Soviet Union's vast resources and manpower, played a crucial role in Germany's defeat. The Soviet Union's ability to mobilize its massive population and industrial base allowed it to sustain high casualty rates and maintain a steady flow of reinforcements and supplies to the front lines. The North African Campaign and the Battle of Tunisia. While the battles on the Eastern Front raged on, another critical theater of World War II was unfolding in North Africa. The North African Campaign, which lasted from 1940 to 1943, saw the Allied forces, primarily composed of British and Commonwealth troops, engaging the German Afrika Korps and their Italian allies in a series of battles across the deserts of Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia. The campaign began with Italy's declaration of war on Britain and France in June 1940. Italian forces, already present in Libya, launched an offensive against British-held Egypt. However, the Italian advance was quickly halted, and the British launched a counterattack, driving the Italians back into Libya. In response to the Italian setbacks, Germany dispatched the Afrika Korps, led by the renowned General Erwin Rommel, to North Africa in February 1941. Rommel's arrival marked the beginning of a series of back-and-forth battles across the desert, with the Germans and Italians initially gaining the upper hand and pushing the British back to the Egyptian border. The tide of the campaign began to turn in late 1942, following the Second Battle of El Alamein. British forces, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, launched a major offensive against the German and Italian positions. The battle, which lasted from October 23 to November 11, 1942, resulted in a decisive Allied victory, forcing Rommel to retreat westward into Libya. Simultaneously, American and British forces launched Operation Torch, an amphibious invasion of French North Africa. The operation, which commenced on November 8, 1942, aimed to secure the vital Mediterranean shipping lanes and trap the Axis forces between the advancing Allied armies. As the Allies closed in from both the east and west, the German and Italian forces found themselves increasingly confined to Tunisia. Rommel, recognizing the precarious nature of his position, recommended a strategic withdrawal to Hitler. However, Hitler, as he had done at Stalingrad, insisted on holding the ground at all costs. The final major engagement of the North African Campaign was the Battle of Tunisia, which lasted from November 1942 to May 1943. The battle saw the Allies, now reinforced by American troops, launching a series of offensives against the German and Italian positions. The Axis forces, despite their determined resistance, were gradually worn down by the superior Allied numbers and resources. One of the key factors contributing to the Allied success in Tunisia was their air superiority. The Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces conducted extensive bombing campaigns against Axis supply lines and positions, disrupting their ability to mount effective counterattacks. As the situation deteriorated, Rommel was recalled to Europe, leaving General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim in command of the remaining Axis forces in Tunisia. Despite von Arnim's efforts to maintain a defensive line, the Allies continued to apply pressure, and on May 7, 1943, the remaining German and Italian forces in Tunisia surrendered, bringing an end to the North African campaign. Hitler's stubbornness and the consequences in Tunisia. As the North African campaign reached its climax in Tunisia, Adolf Hitler's stubborn decision-making and refusal to heed the advice of his military commanders had far-reaching consequences for the Axis forces. Hitler's insistence on holding ground at all costs, even in the face of overwhelming odds, led to the unnecessary sacrifice of thousands of German and Italian soldiers. By early 1943, the Axis forces in Tunisia found themselves in an increasingly precarious position. The advancing Allied armies, bolstered by American reinforcements, were closing in from both the east and west. Erwin Rommel, the commander of the Afrika Korps, assessed the situation and recommended a strategic withdrawal to conserve manpower and resources for the defense of Europe. However, Hitler, as he had done at Stalingrad, refused to countenance any form of retreat. He believed that holding Tunisia was crucial for maintaining a foothold in North Africa and protecting the southern flank of Fortress Europe. Hitler's decision was based more on political considerations and his aversion to admitting defeat than on sound military strategy. As a result of Hitler's intransigence, the Axis forces in Tunisia were ordered to stand their ground and fight to the last man. This decision had disastrous consequences for the German and Italian troops, who found themselves cut off from supplies, reinforcements, and any hope of escape. The Allied forces, with their superior numbers and air supremacy, subjected the Axis positions to relentless bombardment and ground assaults. The German and Italian soldiers, despite their bravery and determination, were gradually worn down by the attrition of constant combat and the harsh desert conditions. Hitler's refusal to allow a timely withdrawal also had significant implications for the wider war effort. By tying down valuable resources and manpower in a doomed defense of Tunisia, Hitler deprived other theaters of much-needed reinforcements. The prolonged resistance in Tunisia diverted Allied attention and resources from other fronts, but ultimately, it only delayed the inevitable Axis defeat. Moreover, the loss of tens of thousands of experienced soldiers and vast quantities of equipment in Tunisia dealt a severe blow to the Wehrmacht's overall strength. Many of these troops could have been redeployed to bolster the defenses of Italy or the Eastern Front, where their presence might have made a difference in the battles to come. Hitler's stubbornness and disregard for military realities in Tunisia were symptomatic of his increasingly erratic and irrational decision-making as the war progressed. His refusal to trust the judgment of his generals and his insistence on micromanaging military operations had devastating consequences for the German war effort. The fall of Tunisia in May 1943 marked the end of the Axis presence in North Africa and paved the way for the Allied invasions of Sicily and Italy. It also served as a stark reminder of the perils of Hitler's inflexible and ideologically driven leadership, which prioritized political considerations over military necessity. The psychological impact of defeat on the German military and civilian population. The series of devastating defeats suffered by the German military in key battles such as Stalingrad, Dunkirk, and Tunisia had a profound psychological impact on both the armed forces and the civilian population of Nazi Germany. These setbacks shattered the myth of German invincibility and dealt a severe blow to the morale and confidence of the nation. Prior to these defeats, the German military had enjoyed a string of stunning victories, overrunning much of Europe with its blitzkrieg tactics. The Wehrmacht's seeming invincibility had become a source of pride and a cornerstone of Nazi propaganda. The German people had been led to believe that their armed forces were superior and that victory was inevitable. However, the shocking defeat at Stalingrad, where an entire German army was lost, sent shockwaves through the German military and civilian population. The realization that the mighty Wehrmacht could be beaten, and beaten so decisively, was a crushing blow to German morale. Soldiers who had once believed themselves to be part of an unstoppable force now found themselves questioning their abilities and their chances of survival. The loss of North Africa, following the defeat in Tunisia, further compounded the psychological impact on the German people. The Axis presence in North Africa had been a symbol of German power and influence, and its loss was a tangible reminder of the shifting tide of the war. As news of these defeats spread, the German civilian population began to experience a growing sense of unease and doubt. The once unshakable faith in Hitler's leadership and the certainty of victory began to erode. Whispered conversations and secret criticism of the regime became more common as people started to question the course of the war and the sacrifices they were being asked to make. The psychological impact of these defeats was not limited to the immediate aftermath of each battle. The cumulative effect of these setbacks, combined with the increasing hardships faced by the German people as the war dragged on, had a corrosive effect on national morale. Rationing, aerial bombardment, and the loss of loved ones all took their toll on the German psyche.